Good afternoon, y'all. A little bit late coming today on the crossover. Thanks for joining in. Just some housekeeping really quick. Grant and Jerry on the If You Don't Like That network at 3 o'clock. Not going to want to miss that one. They will be breaking down Kings basketball and this last push towards the playoffs and playoff seeding, and who knows what they're going to get into. Maybe they'll get into some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. Um, but yeah, join them. Join them on If You Don't Like That. That's Grant's channel. Go to Grant's Twitter page at Grant Napier Show for all the information. Subscribe to his YouTube channel, all that good stuff. So, hey, other housekeeping note. No, Haunted Horse. My face does not belong on a milk carton unless they want to sell more milk. Then they can put my face on there. But I am here in the flesh. Sorry, I've had King's responsibilities, which means I have not been able to be in the water hole. That being said, go check out the water hole tonight live at 6 o'clock. That'll be right after King's post game or pregame. With me on If You Don't Like That. And he's going to have a special guest, Haunted Horse. It's going to be Mock Moda. Don't forget about Mock Moda. He's going to be sitting in for me. So that'll be a fun show. Go to HollywoodRejects.com for all of the links. All right. Well, coming off a Kings win, really good win, actually. I was impressed with how they played last night. I love the balance. The balance is what stuck out to me. I mean, we can go right to the one stat that Grant and I always look at, which is assists to turnovers. The Kings had 19 assists in the first half and 3 turnovers. That's winning basketball any way you cut it. They end the game over 30 assists. I believe turnovers were in the single digits still. And more than that, the balance, like I said, the 3-point shooting balance. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. That is the sweet spot of where the Kings should be. Now, Keegan, he took 10 because he made 7. It's pretty damn good percentage, 70%. But Herter, I believe, had 5. Fox had 6. Domas had 2 or 3, I want to say, and Barnes had 1 or 2. And that for our starting unit is exactly how it should be. And they finished the game with 43s. They shot 40% from beyond the arc. And that is Kings basketball to a T. That is when their offense is functioning perfectly. So anyways, and another developing story with the Kings is Alex Len and the minutes he continues to get, and doing a good job, doing a really good job. Yes, we all know he looks a little bit different out there with some of the other guys. He's not exactly, he doesn't fit in as well as like a Metu athletically, but he's making a difference in a different way. And I said on Grant's show not too long ago that I thought the benefit of what Metu could do on the offensive end outweighed the benefit of what Len could do on the defensive end, because they're opposite players, right? Len is more of a defensive guy. Metu has a really difficult time guarding, so he's more of a liability on defense. Len, a liability, not a liability, but not a threat on offense. But that defense has really been nice, and he's gotten into the flow of things on offense with the Kings. So he's setting good hard screens. He seems to have good conditioning, especially for a guy that's not played a lot of minutes this year up until these last couple weeks. So it's a good development, because the Kings are gonna need to have him in the playoffs, and I think that's what Mike Brown must have realized. Mike Brown knows that they're going to run into some bangers. They're going to run into some guys with some length. Playoff basketball, with how it's much more physical, that doesn't fit Metu's fancy. And Len possibly could fit that role, and it looks like he is going to fit that role. So Stay tuned on that. We talked also on the post game about Coach Brown leaving the starters in too long. It's something, and I don't agree with it. I'm with Grant, but it's something we're gonna have to live with at this point. Mike Brown, if we're at game 79 and he's leaving the starters in till 3 minutes left, he's gonna keep doing it. Certainly I think the starters minutes will ramp down as we come closer to the end of the season, especially that Nuggets game. I don't expect any of the starters to play that game. But it is what it is. He's chosen to coach that way. It's how he's coached all year. And, it's work. So who are we to question who will likely be the coach of the year in the NBA? So anyways, one other king note, Trey Lyles. What's going on with Trey Lyles? Ever since that scuffle in Sacramento with Brook Lopez during the Milwaukee game, he missed a couple. He was suspended, came back for the game after that, and then was out for a game or two with a shoulder injury. And ever since that scuffle, he's not been right. And the Kings are absolutely going to need him to be right for this playoff run. He is key to what that bench unit does. And if he has an injury, if something's bugging him, get him some rest right now and get him ready. I mean, excuse me, we could only hope that it's, just a slump, and it's a slump coming at a bad time. But if it's anything more than that, they've got to get that figured out, because it's not passing the eye test for me. So hopefully they can get that figured out. Hopefully he can get right. But what I wanted to talk about today was the new, going into effect next season, NBA collective bargaining agreement. Conman and I kind of danced around it a little bit on the Monday version of the crossover. And, there's some, I'm surprised, but I'm happy they were able to come to an agreement this far in advance, because, it's good to have that security. Any stoppage in labor for any sports league is it's terrible. And look at what it did to baseball. Baseball didn't really recover until the quote unquote steroid era. NBA, they were to go into a lockout like they did and have the shortened season. I know there was a couple of them. It's not good for business, and especially with ratings down in the NBA right now. Star players sitting out games all the time. You can directly attribute ratings to that. NBA All-Star game, lowest ratings in a very long time. It's good that they have this security now. Let's just put it that way. It is a 7-year deal that takes you through, I believe, 2029. There is a 6th year opt-out in the deal, so you can keep your eyes peeled for that. But we'll touch on, before we get to more of the analytical, I guess more intricate stuff. Some of the top things right off the bat that you'll notice. The first one is the NBA is going to implement an in-season tournament, either starting in 23 or 24. It's going to be a pooled tournament. It's going to be integrated in with the regular season schedule. And then there's going to be basically a 4-team or like a Final Four style event held at a neutral location, which likely will be Las Vegas. That's what I've been hearing. That's what a lot of people are saying. And that it feels like almost a second NBA All-Star weekend, right? To a degree. The winner, so whoever wins the tournament or whoever's in that championship game, technically they will have played 83 games. But the winner of the tournament, the players each get what's reported to be around $500,000 each. So that's a new wrinkle. I'm not sure what that does to boost ratings. I'm not sure what that does or if it has any effect on our next topic we're going to hit on, in which the topic that I think is probably the biggest. Load management. Does it affect load management? Does it make it any different for these guys? Like if it's a tournament game, like they're gonna want to play. I don't know. 500K to your 11th, 12th guy on the bench. Okay, that's a lot of money. But 500K to your LeBrons, to your Giannis's, to your De'Aaron Foxes. That's not a lot of money to them, and I'm not trying to downplay how much money that is, but in the grand scheme of things, to them, 500K is probably in the neighborhood of $5 or $10 for us. Okay, let's just put it that way. So we'll see how that plays out. Again, I think they're shooting more towards the 24 season for that, but I'm skeptical of it. It just doesn't. I don't get why. And again, if it's for the load management, then I don't see that moving the load management needle. Which directly transitions me into load management. So if you remember at the All-Star game during Adam Silver's press conference, he said the NBA did not have an issue with load management. That asinine statement. It's so far off base, so out of touch, and they do. And I don't think the new rule in the CBA really affects load management whatsoever. And the rule I'm speaking of is you have to play 65 games. It's an 82 game season. Well, 83 if you're in that championship game in the tournament. You have to play 65 games to be eligible to basically get any offseason awards, MVP, all NBA teams, any of the awards you can think of. You are not eligible unless you play 65 games. I haven't done the math. I haven't looked at the numbers on the Stars, what they're playing right now. I would imagine it is below that 65 game mark, but I don't see this stopping load management. Okay, you have to play 65 games. Well, guess what? That's still 15. That's still 18 games. If we take injuries out of the equation, that is still 18 games that Stars can sit out. And, take the Warriors, for instance. 2 trips to New Orleans this year. What do? They sit everybody out. Both of those New Orleans trips. That's not going to stop that. I've been a proponent for a very long time of this. I think, and obviously we have a rule that is now going to be in effect, so it's not going to change. The earliest this can change is the 20 or in 6 years if they opt out of the agreement. But when the schedule is released, okay, because the NBA is so driven by analytics these days, people, you have no idea how much analytics plays into the decision making and to what teams do, how they do it, who plays, who doesn't play, when to sit players out, okay? So when the schedule is released for the upcoming season, if you know already when your back-to-backs are, if you're roughly Kawhi Leonard needs to rest every 3.2 games or whatever, you know what I mean? That's not an accurate number, but they have those numbers. for him to be playing at his best, this is the optimal time to rest him. What you do, in my opinion, is the teams come out in advance before the season starts, before game number 1, and they announce straight up, this is a load management night for this person. This person's sitting out this night. This person's sitting out this night, all the way through the 82 games. So that way the fans know well in advance, okay? But the kicker is that cannot be changed. That cannot be changed. So if for whatever reason you get out to a slow start, and then you guys have a really important game, or a team has an important game later in the season, and that has been earmarked as a rest game for Kawhi or for Paul George, for LeBron, for Giannis, for whoever, Jokic, they can't play in that big game. That's a rest night. Period. End of story. If you guys have injuries, you've experienced injuries, you got to go get somebody from your G League for that night. You can't, your G League team, they can't play. And so to me, that kind of combats it, right? Because teams are going to think twice about when they're going to rest their stars and when they're not. And, you could say, Ryan, well, then they're going to choose games that they think on paper they should win, and those are typically going to be against teams that aren't usually that good, so now those fans aren't going to get to see the stars. That's a good counter argument, absolutely. So that could be a flaw in my idea. It's just a rough idea, but it seems like the fairest way. And then you put a cap on it too. There's got to be a cap. And I get this is kind of like a cap by saying 65 games to qualify for postseason awards. But, it really, the only postseason award that matters, I think, to a lot of these guys are the only ones. MVP, obviously, and All NBA. And the guys that are going to be typically competing for those awards, they're already making the biggest contracts in the NBA. So the financial bonuses or incentives that may be in their contracts for getting a first team NBA, for being the MVP, it really may not move the needle that much. Whereas Matthew Dellavedova, right? Let's say Delly next year, this guy just comes out and he's Jeremy Lin and Russell Westbrook all in one, and he wins the MVP. Now, if he has something in his contract that says, you get a $10 million bonus if you're the MVP, that's going to mean something to him. But yeah, I just don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see if it's going to show how much the guys care about these awards. It really is, because we may see guys that just say, whatever. It's more a championship is more important than an individual award. And that's what it kind of comes down to, right? It's team versus individual. Would you rather have your body right to make a run towards a championship? And you probably make a lot more money on the back end of a championship rather than an individual award, even if it's the MVP. So that's what they've put into place there. I'm not a fan. I don't think it does anything. Love to get Grant and Jerry's opinion on that on the show coming up at 3:00. So let's move on. The minimum age to play in the NBA, they are not changing that. In fact, there were numerous reports that teams aren't interested, were not interested in even entertaining going back to being able to draft high school kids. So the NBA and the teams, the players, are content with the system that is in place now with the G League, and I'm all for that. I think it's great. And, there are options out there besides the G League. I forget the name of the other league. It's something elite, where if you want to forego college for that 1 year, you can go play in that league. But I think it makes sense. You're coming in, and I'm not. You could say, Ryan, look, a year is not going to make a difference between these guys coming into wealth and coming into fame. That difference between 18 and 19. It's still going to have the exact same effect. I don't know. It probably does. The rule isn't so much about that. I think the rule is more about developing players, right? With the G League, I mean, it seems to be working out fairly well, and we'll get to the change with the G League as well. But it looks like it's full steam ahead on making sure that that's the farm team, that's the thriving place for upcoming talent to get to the NBA, and that's good. That's good, and it also gives basketball to cities that don't have an NBA team, right? The farm teams. For instance, Sacramento, their team is in Stockton. So yeah, Stockton, it's a little bit close. Stockton people could come to Sacramento to see a Kings game at any time. But like I have a friend in Milwaukee. The Bucks farm team is in his town in Oshkosh, where he lives, and it's a big deal for them. It is. And so, anyways, I like what they're doing here. So you either have to have a year of college, or you can go to the G League. But yeah, that's where that rule is at. And speaking of the G League, so as you may or may not know, each team in the NBA is allowed currently to have two-way players. That means that they can go back and forth for a finite amount of games between the G League affiliate and the NBA team during the season. If you're playing for the G League team, then you're being paid G League salary. If you're playing for the NBA team, then you're paid NBA money. So the Kings, they have two-way players in Kada and I forget the other one. It'll come to me. What the NBA is doing is they are adding a third two-way player to the roster, meaning that there will be 13 players on a team's, or excuse me, 18 players on a team's roster now going forward. I think it's a great rule. It definitely it helps harbor some of the younger talent. It gets them more exposure. It boosts the G League. It gives the G League more credibility to where, hey, you're only one step away from the NBA. It adds that extra spot. And also, when you look at it, it's if a team has injuries or like rest management, maybe there's more opportunities for those guys to come up immediately. And you might not know the player's name, but it could make the game more competitive in a game where there's injuries or load management, etc. So I am good with that rule. I really like that rule a lot. That will be good to see. Moving on, marijuana. It's kind of been a quiet topic, right? We haven't talked about marijuana for the longest time. So marijuana is now out of testing in the NBA's drug testing policy. So players are allowed to use cannabis and cannot be fined for that. Obviously, you cannot smoke and play on the court. I doubt any NBA player would. But it encourages the conversation about the medicinal effects of cannabis, and it allows for more research, because we all know the problem with opiates, which has usually been the go-to method along with injections and stuff like that. So if teams can utilize CBD, utilize cannabis rubs, even smoking cannabis, if it gives pain relief in lieu of taking a pill, then awesome. So I have no problem with that. We have many states that have legalized cannabis. I guess the one question I do have is, how does this work if you are a team or a player for a team in a state that does not legalize or does not have cannabis legalized? That one may be a little bit interesting. Obviously, it's still okay to use per the NBA. You won't be flagged for it coming up in a drug test, but there could be legal ramifications. That would also mean that it likely could not be used within the team facility because it's looked at as a controlled substance. So it's illegal to possess. So I guess some states will be turning to the legislature there. I mean, the NBA effectively removing it from testing, that's a good lobbying point for proponents of cannabis in states where it is not legal. So anyways, so I like that rule. I think, and I do not use cannabis, or I do not smoke marijuana. I have used CBD rubs for discomfort and pain, and those have actually helped out a lot. So I'm glad that they're expanding their horizons on that, and I think there could be a lot of benefits from it. So anyways, let's move on to, actually, you know what? Let's take a quick break. The crossover will continue in 30 seconds. All right, welcome back to the crossover. All right, let's talk about the salary cap and free agency. This is more minutia. It is digging a little bit deeper. We're going into the formulas really quick, so I'll try to make it. I'll try to put it as much as I can in layman's terms. What the NBA is trying to do is help out the smaller markets and the mid markets with this rule. And the current rule that's in place is, obviously the luxury tax, which will still remain, but there's going to be some caveats to that going forward. The way it works now is if you are over the cap number, you get taxed a percentage per money spent over that cap, and 50% of that tax. So here's a good example. The Golden State Warriors, 200 million over the cap. So they have 200 million in luxury tax. They are, so 150% of that, 100 million of that is redistributed to other teams. The teams that aren't doing as well, the small markets. It's profit sharing, it's cap sharing, and it's supposed to make the league stay more competitive, right? But you can have the money, but that still doesn't mean that a player's going to want to come play for you. in some of the smaller markets. I mean, Sacramento, Portland, yeah, I could name them off, and I'm not talking about your star players. I'm talking about your mid-level, you always hear the mid-level exception, veteran minimum, those things. I'm talking about those kinds of players where you see like a Russell Westbrook sign with the Clippers. You see a Joe Ingles, you see a John Wall, those kinds of signings, those mid-level players that could really help out some smaller market teams. So what the NBA is doing is they are instituting a second threshold with the cap, basically, and the tax. So if you are so far above a certain number that's over the cap, then those teams they're not able to use some of the different exceptions now, like the mid-level exception that will go away. So that means, for instance, a good example for the Warriors is Dante DiVincenzo could not have signed with the Warriors. It wouldn't have worked. So that basically you're driving labor down. That's what you're doing. The cost of labor down, and you're trying to redistribute that labor within. So that would force Dante to go to a team that is not over the cap but can provide that same exception, or the team gets that same exception that the Warriors could use, even though they were still this far over the cap. So really what the spirit of the rule is, instead of redistributing extra money to teams, they're trying to redistribute players to teams, or encourage other those mid-level exceptions to go to teams that are in smaller markets that can still use that exception. So that is kind of interesting. I can read it verbatim for you really quick. Teams above the second apron cannot use the taxpayer mid-level exception to sign free agents. The exception is the only tool tax teams, which would be teams that are in the luxury tax, currently have to pay free agents above the minimum salary. Such contracts could last up to 3 seasons, and this year they could pay as much as $6,479,000 in starting salary. This rule would have prevented 4 free agent signings in 2022. Gallinari to the Boston Celtics, DiVincenzo to the Warriors, Joe Ingles to the Bucks, and John Wall to the Los Angeles Clippers. Teams above the second apron or threshold cannot sign players on the buyout market. The exact definition of buyout market has not been revealed, but it will likely apply to any player who is traded and waived during the season and waived while sacrificing a portion of his salary. So there you go. So that's why I said Russell Westbrook, right? So Russ would not be eligible to go to the Clippers if they were above the cap. And that's commonly what happens. They're trying to stop the super teams from, bolstering up even more with players that probably their play is above what they're being paid. Their value is higher than what the team is paying for them. So it's trying to get, like I said, players distributed amongst the teams that are, in smaller markets. So I am all for that rule. I think that is a good rule. And also notably, This one's big to Sacramento. So they're increasing the max contract for, or the max value of a contract for somebody that stays that's considered a veteran. So it's currently 120%. That's going up to 140%. So roughly, if Domas signs, he's going to get roughly about 20 million more. On that contract. So that's a good thing. Encourages stars to stay. I am happy with that rule, and those are really those are kind of the big things that I see coming out of this. There's we could talk for hours about the CBA. I'm going to try to get somebody on here to talk about the CBA as well, and we can have a further discussion about that. But to me, those are the things that really stick out that are going to be, the biggest changes that you see going forward. So, anyways, enough of the minutia. I at least wanted to give you a broad idea of what's going on with the CBA. A lot has not been made of it because there's been so much else going on. But anyways, all right. So like I said, Grant and Jerry starting here in about 50 minutes on If You Don't Like That. Grant Napier's channel. Do not miss that. Always one of the best shows of the week. It's so great to see those two together. And Jerry is just, God, he's the best. So anyways, I will be tagging along at some point on that show, but go to Grant's Twitter account at Grant Napier Show, or go to his YouTube page. If you don't like that, that's where you can watch the show live. You can also watch it on Twitter live. So please join us. That's going to be a really fun show, as it always is. And I will be back tomorrow with the Thursday version of the crossover. But for today, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Ryan in Sacktown, and I will see you tomorrow.